Go.
Thank you everyone for being here. We are celebrating this evening our 2-month anniversary. Let's hear it! Yay! In that context, FSU is sponsoring Norman Finkelstein. He is going to talk about the Occupy movement in the context of history going back to Gandhi. So we are very pleased to have him here with us. Bear with us as he comes forward.
Well, thank you for inviting me this evening. First of all, I want to just make sure people can hear me.
What are we involved in right now? Let's go.
No, I'm fine. So the people in the back there hear me fine? Good. A little louder, okay. Do you hear me fine now? Okay. Well, thank you for inviting me. And it's an impressive show here. It's not quite what I expected. It looks like a camping grounds. But that's fine. And I hope I'll have some time in the course of the evening for people to tell me exactly what's going on in Boston, because I've not really kept up with much of the activities outside of New York. And even in New York, I've been mostly a demonstration marcher and not an actual participant in the core of the movement, which was at Zuccotti Park. I was puzzling on the way over here on what topic I would speak on. Somebody wrote me last night asking me to speak on the exploitation of the Nazi Holocaust, and that's just a topic I don't want to speak on. A friend of mine, Doug Tarnopol, he wrote a short story, and the short story was about a Seder and conversation around the dinner table, and he listed 10 dinner table conversations during the Seder, 6 of which related in some way to the Holocaust, and the 10th topic of which was entitled Aluminum Siding and the Holocaust. And the very last thing I would want to speak about is Occupy Boston and the Holocaust. The less said on that topic at this point, I think the better said. And so eliminating that from the choices, it came down really to 2 things. One was to speak on Palestine and what's going on there. But that happens to be the topic of lectures I'll be giving this evening at Boston University and tomorrow evening at Northeastern University. And this evening will actually be a special occasion because I will be speaking with my old friend, who's also now my co-author, Muin Rabbani, who I think is probably the shrewdest analyst of Palestinian politics in the world today. He happened to have been invited on the same day as me to speak at Harvard, and so we're going to speak tonight at Northeastern on the modest and humble topic, which is the subject of a little book we're putting out together entitled How to Solve the Israel-Palestine Conflict. So since I'm already going to speak on that, then by process of elimination and also by good fortune, I'm going to end up speaking on the Mahatma, Mr. Gandhi. I'm right now finishing up a pamphlet on Gandhi as it relates to the Occupy movement around the world. And if I weren't convinced that that were the right topic to speak on, as I walked into the park, I saw the statue of the Mahatma. And so the balance now weighed firmly in favor of speaking about him. A couple of years ago, when I was trying to make sense of how to finally end this interminable occupation, Israel's interminable occupation of the Palestinian territories, I decided that the wise thing to do would be to turn to Gandhi and to see what he had to say in the subject. Because after all, in many ways, the struggle that India confronted and the struggle that Gandhi led was not unlike the struggle that the Palestinians had to face. In the case of India,
turn it the other way.
In the case of India, they were facing the most formidable military and economic power of the time. And similarly, in the case of the Palestinians, they're facing a formidable regional power, but behind the formidable regional power, they're also facing the most formidable political and economic power of the time, namely the United States. And so, with that in mind, it seemed a reasonable path to look into Gandhi and see what lessons could be extracted from reading him. And as it happens, however it came to be, the movements that have now emerged, if not around the world, but in the United States, they have appropriated as their metaphor the idea of occupy and ending. Well, in this case, it's not so much ending an occupation, it's, if we can call it, occupying your own land. I'm not sure if it works perfectly in perfect symmetry with Gandhi, but at least the idea of occupy is there. And so we can work with that and figure how to pursue it. So what is there to say about Gandhi? First of all, it's not easy to get a handle on Gandhi. Many people here will be surprised, I suppose, to learn that his collected works run to 100 volumes. And each of the 100 volumes runs to about 500 pages. Gandhi had a lot to say. In fact, it was not, however, in the form of books. He only wrote 2 tiny little volumes. One was a health guide, and the second one was it's a little book. Yeah, it's a little book, but it's actually quite interesting. It's called Hind Swaraj, Indian Independence, or Independence for India. And even though it was written, I think, if my memory has it, was around 1909, Gandhi swore by it for the rest of his life. It's a very eccentric little book, but it's also an interesting one. Gandhi marched to the beat of his own drummer, and he stood by his beliefs over the course of an entire political lifetime. So first of all, you're dealing with a fairly vast body of work. Secondly, Gandhi was not particularly interested in being consistent. He liked to quote Ralph Waldo Emerson Well, the expression is consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds. But there is a word that comes before consistency. Anyone know the exact quote? What? Foolish. Thank you. Foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of small minds, meaning that when you try always to be consistent, you're in fact revealing the smallness of the mental universe that you occupy. And Gandhi firmly believed that, which is to say, he was always contradicting himself. Sometimes he denied it, and sometimes he said, I don't really care. All I care about, as he said, is I'm a practical idealist. I'm a man of action. All I care about is getting things done. And if I said one thing yesterday, and it worked yesterday, and if I say the complete opposite today, and it works today, then who cares really if or not I am being consistent? Well, obviously for those people who are trying to figure out a consistent logical theory from Gandhi, that poses a problem. And then the third problem with trying to sort of analyze Gandhi is that Gandhi was deeply steeped, as he said, in matters of faith and spirit. And he didn't claim to be acting on logic and reason. He placed a great deal of reliance on what he called his inner voice. And obviously an inner voice is not easily amenable to rational analysis. I had the good fortune a couple of years ago, I was visiting South Africa, and I met one of Gandhi's grandchildren, Enaa Gandhi, who was really a wonderfully terrific person. You might say a chip off the block of her grandfather. Very modest, decent, just a solid, good human being. For those of you who know that spiritual that Paul Robeson used to sing, purest kind of a guy, I don't know how I know, but I know that he is the purest kind of a guy. And that was Enaa Gandhi. And she said to me, which resonated for me, she said, yeah, Gandhi had great confidence in his inner voice. Nowadays, I guess if you were to translate it into rational language, it would mean he had very good political intuitions. And there is something to be said, I think, in politics for having a real knack for politics. It's an intuition, it's an instinct. Very few people have it. In my whole adult life of being involved in politics, I can literally count on the fingers of one hand the number of folks who I think have very good political instincts. I would put at the top of the list, for those of you who know him, though he's no longer active in the United States, Alan Nairn. How many people know that name, Alan Nairn? Alan has, in my opinion, the best political instincts of anyone I've ever met. And Gandhi had very good political instincts. He called it his inner voice. The problem is, as I said, it's very difficult to make rational sense of an inner voice because it's so impulsive, or apparently impulsive. So that's all a long way of saying to try to make sense of Gandhi is not easy. But I do think you can tease out from Gandhi a consistent theory, and one that's not only of academic interest, but also of interest to people who are practicing politics and want to figure out how to make a movement like this grow, and how you can bridge the gap that still separates as you walk towards the Occupy Wall Street terrain, still separates all the people who are just walking by, and as if there are two universes simultaneously coexisting. And obviously the goal is to break down the wall between us and them and try to make it all of us against inevitably a handful of them. And so how do you go about doing that? How do you make the 99% not just a theory and not just a reality, but how do you make the 99% an active reality? Active means everybody becoming a participant. And that's the real challenge, I think, the challenge that faces all of us. So what do you have to say about the subject? Obviously, he has a lot. I'm going to just try to put it in very simple, basic terms, not because you're not capable of more complex terms, but just for reasons of time. And then we can have a little opportunity to discuss it. The first insight of Gandhi, at any rate for me, the first insight of Gandhi was politics is not about trying to change public opinion. Politics is about trying to get people to act on what they already know is wrong. Now that might not sound like a particularly profound insight, but for me, speaking personally, I came from a political tradition where there were a handful of people who possessed truth. We sometimes designate ourselves the vanguard. And our job, our political aim, was to enlighten the benighted masses, to bring them truth where they lived in a world of what we used to call false consciousness. And we were supposed to dispel all of the falsities and all of the mythologies in which they were surrounded, encumbered, however you want to put it. We used to think that our truths were, and we had the presumption to think that our truths were scientific. We had a scientific truth, even though most of the people who claim to have a mastery of the scientific truth, I don't think got past high school biology, which I think should have caused some humility, but it never did. Well, Gandhi said that's not what politics is about. Politics is about getting people to act on what they already know is wrong. That we all of us, in particular the people assembled here, all of us pass through the day from the moment we get up till the last moment before passing into semi-eternity. All of us see from the beginning of the day to the end 1,000 things that we recognize are just wrong. That's just not right. That's wrong. That's unfair. That shouldn't be the way it is. 10,000 things every day. My day usually begins with waiting for the subway to come, and after about 5 minutes I recognize it's wrong. After around 10 minutes I want to throttle the engineer, and around 15 minutes I want to assassinate the mayor. I have to be careful about saying things like that now. But we're all speaking in metaphors and poetic hyperbole. I have to enter that caveat lest I be accused of something yet new. But the truth of the matter is, of the 10,000 things which we see are wrong, most of us don't do anything about any of them, and at most, we do something about one of them. And what Gandhi says the art of politics is to get people to act on those things they see around them that they already know are wrong. We're not enlightening them. They already possess the enlightenment. What we want to do is to spur them into action, or as Gandhi once put it, to quicken their dead conscience into action. So what does that mean as a practical matter? As a practical matter, it means, let's say, every year when winter time comes, there are large numbers of Mexican workers in my neighborhood who sleep under the overpass. And as you can imagine, when the temperatures get more frigid, the sight is ever more painful and pathetic to see these people bundled up in sub-zero temperatures under these usually raggedy, filthy covers. And I jog by them every day or other day now. I jog by them, and every time I see them, for years now, I make this resolution. I'm going to give them one of my winter coats. In fact, I'm going to give them 2 or 3 of my winter coats, because I have a closet full of old winter coats going back to when I was 16 years old. I have my Mighty Mac from when I was 16, which I paid, by the way, a hefty price, $80, which back then, which was 1970, was money. Actually, nowadays, for me, it's still money. But it was $80. I have that one, and I have all the other ones. And I always say I'm going to give them the winter coat. And truth be told, till this day, having made that resolution every winter for the past at least 10 winters, I never do it. I come back, I get back into my old routine, and before you know it, I'm cursing some other injustice, and I've forgotten about the Mexican workers until the next day. So for Gandhi, what is politics? Politics is using the art of nonviolent resistance to quicken the conscience of people. What does that mean practically? Practically, it means, it's very simple. If all of you assembled here, I live on Ocean Parkway, which is a fairly broad boulevard in Brooklyn. If all of you were to stand on that boulevard, block traffic, and say, we're here to remind you, there are homeless people, they need your winter coats. I know me. If that happened, I'd be the first one out there. Not with one, I'd be carrying 5. Nobody had to enlighten me that was wrong. I needed people to act what Gandhi called satyagrahis, practitioners of nonviolence, though satyagraha literally means hold on to the truth, or that's how it's been translated. Satyagrahis, practitioners of nonviolence, to carry on activities which will get people to act. And frankly, I think that's the stage where the Occupy movement right now is. The Occupy movement, it's not trying to tell people, any of the people out there, so to speak, it's not trying to tell them that there are injustices. Everyone knows, except unfortunately most college professors, everybody knows that this country is just become, not that it always wasn't, but now it's just become ridiculously unjust. Everybody knows that. Everybody who walks by here knows that. So you don't have to inform them of that fact. What the Occupy movements did, including, by the way, including to myself, it acted as a stimulant to do something. And what was, in the case of New York, the main stimulant? Everyone will tell you the same story. The main stimulant, if I can use the language, it was pure Gandhi. The main stimulant was the 700 arrests on the Brooklyn Bridge. Now, when people saw that, that's what quickened their conscience. It's not that they recognized what these people stood for was right. And now it's time for all of us to act. Or not all, but much larger numbers than hitherto. And it required the action of nonviolent resistors, in this case, showing the willingness to get arrested. That's what started or planted the seeds for a real mass movement. That's one part of Gandhi, but there's one important qualification, if we can call it that. And the qualification is that nonviolent resistance can only work if not only the method is seen as just, but also the goals have to be seen as just. You have to have, in Gandhi's terms, not just purity of method, but you also have to have purity of goals. That is, goals which the public accepts as being legitimate. So what does that mean practically? Let's take a typical example. If you look at public opinion polls in the United States, they all consistently show that the American public is divided right down the middle on the issue of abortion. About 50% of Americans call themselves pro-choice, and about 50% of Americans call themselves pro-life. So let's take a hypothetical. Let's imagine that the 50% of the Americans who call themselves pro-life, they decide to descend en masse to all the abortion clinics in the United States. And they say, we're going to go on a fast unto the death unless the abortion doctors cease to perform abortions. Now the method couldn't be more pure. We're going to commit self-sacrifice. We're not hurting anyone else. We're willing to commit the equivalent of self-immolation for the ideal we believe. So there can be no quarrel about the purity of the means. But if I can ask somebody in the audience, if I were to ask you, how many of you would describe yourselves as pro-choice? Raise your hand. Okay, so if I were to ask this pro-choice person over here, I guess your name is Susan? If these people went on a fast until the death in order to stop the committing of abortions, would it move you? Of course not. Actually, she shook her head no, emphatically. Of course not. Actually, most pro-choice people would say, I wish you'd go on a fast until the death, and I hope you drop dead. So, the fact that your means are pure is not enough. You have to find a goal that also resonates and is seen as just by the broad public. And that's a real challenge, because I don't have to tell you, it's you that will be telling me. Everybody recognizes that the Occupy movement is now entering a new phase. And the phase is from getting people to rally under the completely legitimate but still negative slogan of "this system is unfair." The next obvious point is, okay, what are you offering as an alternative, or what are you offering as your interim goals? And so now the real challenge is to find the right goals that will resonate with the public, and that the public will see equally as just as the methods that are used. Now that may sound trivial, but to my thinking it's very important. I will speak about it at length this evening in the context of the Palestine movement and what goals I think are workable and what goals are not. But I'll end by just giving you an illustration from my example earlier, which I think will make my point, bring my point home to you. I think there's a big mistake about politics often, and the mistake in politics is to confuse what you personally believe in and what you personally think is moral or just with what politically should be the goal. In my opinion, the two are very different. So what does that